By early 1950s, King George VI was a shadow of the man he once was. Years of stress, war, and the burden of unexpected kingship had taken their toll. But it was his long-time battle with smoking that ultimately sealed his fate. A heavy smoker for most of his life, he had surgery in 1951 to remove part of his lung due to cancer. Although the palace remained tight-lipped about the severity of his condition, those closest to him could see that his decline was irreversible. The king's once strong frame had withered, his breath grew laboured, and his face bore the weary look of a man who knew the end was near. And on the night of February 5th, 1952, he retired to bed at Sandringham House, never to wake again. The king was dead. Far from home in Kenya, Princess Elizabeth had just begun a royal tour with Prince Philip. One moment, she was a princess, enjoying the breathtaking views of the African landscape, and the next, she was queen. The news reached them in the most unceremonious way. A message, quiet words exchanged, and a sudden realization that nothing would ever be the same again. There was no time to grieve. Dressed in mourning black, hastily provided in transit, Elizabeth flew back to Britain to assume the throne.
Her tour of the Commonwealth cancelled. The princess we knew as a girl and watched in the even growth of her stature comes back to meet her ministers as queen over the great lands that for 15 years acknowledged her father as head. Now the Princess Elizabeth we knew and loved returns amongst us as our queen. Before her plane, her government and leaders of the other parties receive her greeting.
The weight of duty settled on her before she could even lay eyes on her father's lifeless body. At just 25, she was now Queen Elizabeth II, forced to embody strength when all she wanted was to mourn the man who had been her greatest guide.
Through the long years, she had grown amongst us, one of us. The little girl we knew has become Queen Elizabeth. The love we gave her has become allegiance.
The Queen Mother, once the steady pillar of her family, was shattered. George VI had not been prepared to rule, yet he gave everything to the role, sacrificing his own health for the weight of the crown. And now she was not just a widow, but a former queen, a relic of a past era. Stripped of the status she once held beside her husband, she found herself without a clear purpose, clinging to Elizabeth in support, while fiercely guarding Margaret, who she feared would be lost without her father. Then there was Margaret. The father who had deeply adored her was gone, and as if that loss wasn't enough, the sister she had grown up with, as an equal, had now become something untouchable. With Elizabeth's ascension, their relationship changed overnight. What had been a bond of childhood closeness now required a deep bow, formal addresses, and an unspoken understanding that Elizabeth was no longer just her sister, she was the sovereign. A year later, in 1953, the kingdom erupted in celebration. For the first time in over a century, a young queen was being crowned. The streets of London pulsed with energy, draped in flags and filled with adoring crowds. Inside Westminster Abbey, beneath the grandeur of centuries-old tradition, Elizabeth sat solemnly as the St. Edward's crown was placed upon her head. Trumpets sounded, voices roared, and the world welcomed the new queen. But amid all the majesty, Margaret sat quietly, her heart heavy with a loss only few could understand. She had lost her father, and now, in a different way, she had lost Elizabeth too. The sister who had once been her partner in mischief, laughter, and childhood secrets was now sacrosanct, distant, not by choice, but by duty. Margaret had always lived in her sister's shadow, but now that shadow had grown taller and colder. If Elizabeth belonged to the monarchy, where did that leave her? It was in that moment beneath the golden glow of the coronation that Margaret realized she was truly on her own. She was now the spare, with no clear role, no defined purpose, and from then on, every choice she made, every decision she took, would be entirely her own. But the road she chose was not one of quiet acceptance. It was filled with rebellion, heartbreak, and scandal. Because if the institution would not make room for her, then she would carve out her own path, no matter the cost. And so began Margaret's descent, a royal life spiraling out of control in ways the crown had never prepared for. Her love life was as chaotic as it was captivating. It was the highlight of forbidden romance, scandalous affairs, and heartbreak. Margaret's first love was Group Captain Peter Townsend, a dashing Royal Air Force officer and her father's equerry. Their romance began in 1947 during a royal tour of South Africa when Margaret was just 17 and Townsend was married with 2 sons. By 1952, Townsend had divorced his wife and proposed to Margaret. Their relationship, however, faced invincible obstacles as the Church of England forbade remarriage after divorce. Additionally, as Margaret was under the age of 25, she required the Queen's approval to marry under the Royal Marriages Act of 1772. Queen Elizabeth II, bound by her role as the head of the Church and pressured by Prime Minister Winston Churchill's government, could not grant her sister's request. Townsend was sent abroad for 2 years to quell the media frenzy surrounding their romance. In the end, Margaret chose duty over love. In October 1955, she announced they could not marry, citing her responsibility to the Commonwealth and the Church's teachings on marriage. A decision that left a lasting scar on her, as she never fully recovered from the heartbreak. In 1960, Margaret married photographer Anthony Armstrong Jones in what was seen as a marriage of convenience. While their union appeared glamorous on the surface, it was fraught with tension from the start. Armstrong Jones was not Margaret's first choice. She had been romantically linked to other suitors, but settled for him after her heartbreak with Townsend. The couple had 2 children, David, born in 1961, and Sarah in 1964. But their marriage quickly unravelled. Both were unfaithful. Armstrong Jones had numerous affairs, including one with his future second wife, while Margaret sought solace in high-profile relationships with celebrities. However, Margaret's most infamous affair was with Roddy Llewellyn, a landscape gardener, 17 years her junior. Their relationship became public in 1976 when photographs of them on holiday in Mustique surfaced in tabloids, causing a media uproar. This scandal further strained her already fragile marriage, leading to their separation in the same year and eventual divorce in 1978, the first high-profile royal divorce since King Henry VIII. Margaret's romantic choices reflected her struggle between personal desires and royal obligations. Her doomed relationship with Townsend set the tone for a life marked by unfulfilled love and scandalous escapades. Despite her vibrant personality and charm, her relationships often ended in disillusionment. In the 1990s, Margaret reportedly reconnected briefly with Townsend at a reception where they exchanged letters they had written during their relationship, a bittersweet reminder of what might have been. Where romance failed, Margaret filled the void in her life with opulence. Her mornings began at 9 o'clock with breakfast in bed and chain smoking while listening to the radio. By 11 o'clock, she indulged in an hour-long baths run by her maids before enjoying a vodka pick-me-up at 12:30 p.m. Lunches were extravagant affairs shared with the Queen Mother, 4 courses served on silver dishes accompanied by wine and fine cheeses. Her demands were legendary. Staff were required to hold ashtrays for her during formal events, or stay awake until 3 a.m. for her late-night parties. She insisted on being addressed as "Ma'am Darling," and often criticised hosts' food or decor without hesitation. But sadly, Margaret's extravagant lifestyle could neither fill the void she had nor shield her from what was to come. Eventually, her rebellious choices caught up with her, setting pace for a tragic decline. Decades of heavy smoking and drinking, coupled with a lifestyle of indulgence, resulted in a series of health issues that confined her to a wheelchair and eventually led to her death. The first major warning came in 1985 when Margaret, then 54, underwent surgery to remove part of her left lung due to smoking-related complications. This operation drew stark parallels to her father, King George VI, who died from lung cancer. But despite this wake-up call, Margaret resumed smoking within months and continued drinking heavily. Over the years, she suffered from bronchitis, pneumonia, recurring migraines, and even mild hepatitis, all exacerbated by her lifestyle choices. In 1998, she experienced her first stroke while dining with friends on the Caribbean island of Mustique. A year later, another stroke caused a severe accident in which she scalded her feet in a bath, leaving her partially paralyzed and reliant on a wheelchair for mobility. By 2000 and 2001, she suffered additional strokes that affected her vision and further restricted her independence. These health struggles left Margaret increasingly reclusive. She rarely left her bed and withdrew from public life entirely as she approached the end of life. Depression also set in at this point due to the loss of her once vibrant social life. And on February 8, 2002, Margaret suffered her last major stroke at Kensington Palace, which led to cardiac complications overnight. She died the following morning at King Edward VII's Hospital, aged 71.
Although her death was not unexpected, Margaret's passing has again led to a public outpouring of grief here. To many, she was the Diana of her day, a beauty whose life as a princess was often tainted by tragedy.
She was a beautiful woman in her early years, really beautiful.
I think it's very sad. I think she had quite a sad life.
Margaret's death, attributed to the cumulative effects of multiple strokes and heart issues, marked the end of a life both dazzling and tragic. A woman who lived unapologetically but paid dearly for her excesses. Her story is one of contrasts, a royal rebel admired for her charm and wit, but criticised for her self-destructive habits. Forever caught between duty and desire, Margaret struggled to define herself outside the shadow of Queen Elizabeth II. In the end, what she sought remained elusive, her vibrant spirit dimmed too soon by the very habits that once fueled her glamorous image. And so, Margaret's legacy remains both fascinating and cautionary in equal measure. At the time of Princess Margaret's death, a young Prince Harry, just 17, and in his final year at Eton College, was already stirring up his own kind of commotion. While the world mourned the tragic decline of a rebel princess whose excesses and heart-wrenching choices had finally taken their toll, a different kind of rebellion was taking shape. A rebellion embodied by a prince who would not be tied down by tradition. In 2001, whispers of youthful indiscretion began to surface. Reports emerged that Harry had experimented with cannabis and alcohol at Highgrove House, his father's stately Gloucestershire estate, and later at a modest local pub near Eton. The revelations of underage substance abuse were both shocking and worrying. A trusted member of staff even noted the unmistakable scent of cannabis trailing through the palace corridors while on duty. Determined not to let these early lapses define his son's future, Prince Charles intervened decisively. In an uncharacteristic yet desperate bid to pull Harry away from the pitfalls of addiction, Charles arranged for a visit to Featherstone Lodge, a rehabilitation centre in Peckham, South London. There, surrounded by recovering addicts whose stories bore the scars of choices made too late, Harry was given a stark, unfiltered glimpse into the perils of substance abuse. However, as the years unfolded, his defiance of royal protocols became not just a phase, but a declaration of his desire to forge an identity apart from the gilded cage of tradition. By his early 20s, he was a fixture in London's underground nightlife, a realm where high-profile lads' nights and clandestine rendezvous were the order of the evening. His circle included colourful characters like Guy Pelly, an influential figure in the aristocratic circles who shared in his love for spontaneity and unbridled revelry. The imagery was vivid. Harry was often seen laughing with friends in the ambient glow of exclusive clubs, his charm and audacity shining through even in the most scandalous moments. One notorious incident found him at a 2005 costume party, clad in a Nazi uniform, a misstep that ignited international outrage and underscored his relentless push against societal norms. And yet, beneath the allure of wild nights and rebellious escapades lay a restless search for meaning, a quest that led him to a decision only few in his position might ever imagine. Seeking to redefine himself and step away from the predictable path of pampered privilege, Harry enrolled at the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst in September 2005. There, amidst rigorous training and the crucible of discipline, he began a decade-long military career that would take him into the very heart of conflict. His first tour in Afghanistan between 2007 and 2008 as a forward air controller exposed him to the brutal realities of war. And his second, between 2012 and 2013, serving as an Apache helicopter pilot cemented his reputation as a man unafraid of danger. But it is his public comments, raw, unvarnished, and sometimes shockingly candid, about the challenges at taking enemy fighters out of the game that sparked a fierce debate. To some, it was an attempt to prove that he was more than just the spare, and to others, it was a desperate bid for respect, a way to fill the void left by a childhood overshadowed by comparison. The battlefield gave way to another kind of confrontation, a war waged against an unyielding media machine. Perhaps the most headline-grabbing chapter in Harry's life came when he, alongside Meghan Markle, made the unprecedented decision to step back from their royal duties. Their 2018 wedding had been a fairy tale moment for many. Yet, behind the pomp and circumstance lay mounting frustrations, relentless media scrutiny, an insidious culture of intrusion, and the ever-present shadow of expectations. By 2020, the couple boldly announced their departure from royal life, a move that rattled centuries-old traditions and polarized public opinion. Their relocation to California was more than a physical move. It was a symbolic break from a world that had long dictated their worth by comparison, in relation to his elder brother William, and now Catherine, his wife, against Meghan. In recent years, Harry's quest for authenticity has led him into the glare of the global media spotlight. His candid tell-all interview with Oprah Winfrey shattered the long-standing royal facade, exposing the inner workings of an institution steeped in tradition and secrecy. He spoke of painful memories, mental health struggles, and a family dynamic that often left him feeling like an afterthought. In his memoir, Spare, he pulled back the curtain even further, offering intimate revelations that ranged from the heart-wrenching to the bizarre. Stories that oscillated between catharsis and confrontation. These raw disclosures weren't just personal confessions. They were an overt challenge to a narrative that had been written for him since birth. And yet, the battle was far from over. Harry's legal and media skirmishes have become emblematic of his ongoing struggle against a system that has long tarnished his image. Lawsuits against invasive tabloid practices underscore a relentless fight for privacy and respect. Each legal battle, every public rebuke, is a testament to his unwavering determination to assert his individuality in a world that often sees him only as a side note to royal destiny. As Harry continues to carve a new path in his newfound freedom, fiercely taking charge of his narrative, Margaret's journey serves as a poignant contrast. Once she traded her true love, Peter Townsend, for royal privileges, she sealed her fate. Her struggle would only get so far, and the more she tried to break free, the more she drowned in her excesses. But perhaps in the grand tapestry of royalty, Margaret crawled so that Harry could run. And as he continues to sculpt his destiny, challenging traditions, breaking barriers, and demanding his own story be told, the question remains. With such divergent paths, marked by both defiance and tragedy, where do the legacies of Harry and Margaret ultimately stand?